Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. We have quite a number of items this morning, 9 to be exact. So we're going to get into our work right away. Our first item is approval of the committee recommendation for the FY20 operating budget for the Board of Elections. We had some particular questions that we needed some answers from, and so who is here? Everybody that is here for that item?
Oh, Madam President,
Yes.
I was told by Marlene that the Innovation Fund was being put first today.
I was not informed about that, so. Okay. If somebody can tell me what we're doing, that'd be great. Okay, then we need to do. Okay, so we
Okay.
will do this quickly.
Yep.
We will proceed
Okay.
with the Board of Elections.
Innovation Fund next.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so Ms. Myhill, can you, well, before actually we get started, I do want to acknowledge that this is Board Member Marianne Keefe's last meeting, and just truly want to express our appreciation for all of your contributions and your steadfast leadership on the Board of Elections. You are going to be missed, but as you just indicated to us, you're going to be very active still, and that is a wonderful thing because you have extraordinary experience and always so supportive of the efforts to facilitate voter participation. And so for that, we really do want to thank you, and we're really glad to hear that you will continue to be very involved. That's a wonderful thing. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to you and the members of this committee for all your support. In my 8 years of service, it's really been tremendous and a great partnership. So I look forward to continuing to work and see you all down the road.
Thank you. We still have a lot to do. So, Ms. Myhill, can you please point us to the particular item that was outstanding so we can
Sure. At the
Move
last
right
committee meeting, the committee had requested information from the Board of Elections on ways that they could increase their advertising and outreach budget. That's been a concern over the last several years for the committee. And they've provided quite a bit of information that's attached to your packet. On page 2 of the cover memorandum, there is a summary of the requested amount. It totals $262,000, which would be on top of the amount that's already in the Board of Elections budget. What's currently budgeted for outreach and advertising is $34,500, which the committee added several years ago, the council added, and then about $70,000 for specific advertising. The rest of the material that is produced for outreach and advertising is actually drawn on various line items. It's not actually specifically budgeted for that purpose. So with the plan that is summarized on page 2, it would provide the Board of Elections with an actual budget for these outreach items.
Okay, do you remember how much this committee had added in the past years for this specifically?
It was the $34,500, which was for temporary personnel, which is, and the committee also, I believe last year, the year before, increased the advertising budget as well. So for the
Yeah.
total of $70,000.
Last year, you doubled the advertising
Right.
budget, which we thank you for.
Right, so in total, I think that the committee had added about, what, 100,000? Is that what we're saying in total, roughly?
So roughly $140,000 is what is currently in the budget
Specifically
for outreach and
Right.
advertising.
And so
combined.
140,000 plus the
Plus the
262,200, so that is roughly, what, 400?
300 and, yeah,
whatever.
about 300.
Something like that, okay. Well, I don't know what my colleagues would like to do. I appreciate the breakdown. I am mindful that obviously this would be a great jump, which I think it's important given all of the challenges that we have had. I would be probably inclined to support 2 tranches to see where it can take us, given that this committee has been so committed and has already added about $100 and something thousand in the past, and then see what can occur. Councilmember Katz.
I'm supportive of this as well. 2 tranches would work for me. I know that this does take time for them to order in items and whatnot, so I think we need to do it sooner rather than later, but I'm certainly supportive.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I'm supportive as well. I was just wondering, a huge number, a huge piece of this is the 115,000, 125 for printing and postage. Is that to send mailers to remind people that it's time to vote? You know, what election day is, or?
Yes, it is, and we'll be happy to, I can go ahead and jump into the detail on what some of these are if you'd like, or I know that our
I don't think we need to go
President-
into too much detail, but just generally,
Yes.
is that for mailers and flyers to mail to people?
Yes.
So I guess,
Member Friedson,
it-
if you look on circles 2 and 3, it provides an overview of what that would pay for, which would be mailings to voters whose polling places have changed, mailing to voters who have cast provisional ballots, and some other brochures and mailings.
Yeah, it's also a mailing to unaffiliated voters in advance of the deadline to choose a party affiliation in case they want to do that. And obviously, the mailing to voters who cast a provisional ballot helps us with our line management as well, because that makes the lines that much longer when we do that.
And just to follow up, Council, we had a huge turnout last election. Over 400,000 people showed up to vote. This election is going to be wildly popular, and we're going to have a huge turnout, especially on the Democratic side in the primary. So we have to consider that this is going to be an extraordinary, large, very large turnout.
I think we all agree on that. I certainly am supportive. I guess my only question was whether we should make the tranches specific to the printing, because I see that as a separate item in some of the other areas, but I'm open to move with whatever the other committee members would like to do.
So I think I'm hearing that there is interest and support for 2 tranches, one for 130,000 and one for 130,000 to 120. I will also just mention that, Ms. Myhill, what I would like to do is that I would say towards mid-fall for us to come back to this item to hear a little bit of more in-depth progress on all of these areas, and then schedule, check-in points to understand where we are going. And also for the record, note that because we're so aware that this is going to be a, very, very interesting election and very popular election going forward, et cetera, we feel so strongly about this particular type of support. And, just want to make sure that people know that the GO committee has always been there and leading the way for outreach and for making sure that all of our voters are well informed. So we shall see what happens with the reconciliation list, but I am very hopeful that we will get there. So with that,
Madam President, if I could, I would just want to say that truer words were never spoken than what you just said about how the GO committee has been there from the very beginning. This entire program would not have been possible without your support from the beginning, since we've been on the board, and we very much appreciate everything that you've done in this area.
absolutely. It's
Agreed.
very
And just one
important.
last
All right.
thing. I want to pay tribute to Gilberto Zelaya, who's been a giant in this field. Dr. Z, as you call him, has been a leader in this outreach program, and Allison McLaughlin
Yes.
and Margaret Jurgensen have been tremendous supporters of this program.
They
But
have.
Dr. Z has been
Yeah,
outstanding.
I was gonna close my remarks because we do have to, we're not time crunchy, but I was gonna close my remarks by acknowledging Dr. Z, Dr. Zelaya, as we affectionately call him, for all of your creative and innovative ways that you have reached out to not just members of the immigrant community, but just, the entire county. I mean, you really, truly hit the mark in that area. And so what we want to do is give you the appropriate level of resources so you can continue to take this to the next level. So do appreciate all of you being here, and we will work very hard to make sure that we get you those resources.
And you are
as well.
appreciated. Thank you. So, and
Thank
the community
you very
appreciates
much.
you as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope you can catch that flight, whoever that person was. All right, so we will move on to the Innovation Fund now. We do have Mr. Klein, the Chief Administrative Officer for the administration, and Dr. Torregas is here. And so let me turn over to Mr. Klein for some remarks, and then Dr. Torregas, you can talk to us about your recommendation.
Great. Thank you, Madam President, members of the council. I know we share a strong interest in reducing the cost of county government and ensuring financial sustainability. The Innovation Fund is an important part of our strategy. The Innovation Fund would be a revolving loan fund to invest in great ideas that improve customer service and generate real budgetary savings or new revenue for the county. I implemented an Innovation Fund in Baltimore, and it worked. Starting with a $2 million appropriation in fiscal 2012, an extraordinarily difficult budget, the fund has grown to nearly $10 million. The reason for continued funding was strong return on investment. For example, a project to rejuvenate underutilized surface parking lots invested $240,000 in paving, striping, fencing, lighting, landscaping, and smart meters, and immediately boosted annual revenue by $140,000 with expectation of that multiplying. Other projects turned tree waste into revenue, reduced fire vehicle accidents, and automated plans review. Of the 11 loans made since 2012, at least 5 are fully repaid, and all but 1 are in some stage of repayment. One reason for Baltimore's success was a rigorous application and review process, which I would implement here also, including council participation. Our departments have been thinking about potential Innovation Fund projects so that they are ready to write proposals as soon as funding is approved. I am concerned about the staff's recommended reduction to the Innovation Fund appropriation that we have proposed. The recommended funding level would severely limit our ability to fund projects that deliver meaningful results. The average loan from the Baltimore Fund was between $300,000 and $400,000. I'm confident that we could get 5 to 6 projects of this size going in year 1 of the Montgomery County Innovation Fund. These are investments that will pay off in real improvements to our bottom line. Funding it at only $450,000 would be a missed opportunity, and I'm just concerned about skimping on investments that are going to save us money or generate new revenue for us. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Torres, can you please explain or share with us your recommendation?
Sure. As I say on the bottom of page 3, the mark of a learning and progressive organization is the way it deals with innovation, and the proposed process and techniques behind it are the right ones. So I definitely recommend this Innovation Fund, which is new for departments of Montgomery County. I also remind you that the GEO Committee has been approving and shepherding innovation through the Interagency Technology Fund for some 7 to 10 years. I've attached procedures that you have overseen and have supported. One of the reasons for my recommendation is that the environment and the culture in Montgomery County is such that the projects that you have authorized with the Innovation Fund of the ITPCC, the Interagency Technology Committee, have been of the range of $50,000 to $100,000. So it's just the experience that we've had so far is to take small projects and see how they work. I think the CAO makes a good point that perhaps with more money and a larger per project funding, a lot more could be accomplished. Mine's a more cautious approach. I recommend 3 at $150,000 as a start. It would take some time to ramp up. You'd have to establish auditing techniques, especially if you expect paybacks. You have to know where the money that was saved, in fact, materializes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just a difference of caution that leads to my recommendation. And of course, you're looking at a lot of investments through the Reconciliation Fund, so it may be more practical to look at a smaller, more cautious approach. But really, the decision is up to you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So walk me through, please. So,
Yeah.
so a department comes to somebody, to you, or who actually approves this or doesn't approve this?
Yeah.
Or?
The coordination would be through our innovation manager, and we're very close to hiring an innovation manager. We would have a review committee made up of council representation, some representation from the community, meaning, for example, retired bank president, maybe an IT entrepreneur, and some other members from the administration. And it's a very rigorous process. It starts with a concept, then it has to be, think of, applying for a bank loan for a business. It's maybe not quite that rigorous, but.
It's got to be close.
It's got to be close, because we need to feel, we're willing to take some risk, otherwise you're not going to get breakthrough innovation, but we want to feel confident in the financial projections, in who's going to implement this, how is it going to be implemented, key personnel, et cetera. And so it is a rigorous process, and after the loan is approved, there would be quarterly reporting back to this committee, and as Costa said, we have to have very good accounting to make sure that we're capturing the budgetary savings or the new revenue, that the fund is being repaid. But once the fund is repaid, these become general fund savings or revenue, and then we can recycle the dollars into new projects.
All right, and how is it repaid? So during the budget process, we would allocate you would send over, we would work through, that we would allocate the same amount of funds and then pay ourselves back? How does that
Yes.
work?
Yeah, so you would take, there'd be, baseline funding level, and we would demonstrate that the costs have been reduced as a result of the project. And so we would capture those savings, return them to the NDA. And again, once the NDA is repaid, then those become ongoing budgetary savings for the general fund.
Well, and I guess in one way, it's an accounting type of thing. I mean, because if we allocate, if the money that's allocated goes back into another fund, it still has to be allocated. I mean, it still has to be, and whether you have $10 million or we have $10 million, it's still $10 million, it's county money.
Right, but it's savings that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
I understand the savings part. I mean, I'm fine for the idea of the fund. I just don't understand how you pay it back. I mean, it's not like we're in a profit-making business here.
Right.
And so what happens, did Baltimore ever have an example where they thought it was going to be something that would be, paying itself back and it didn't?
We had one.
You had one?
Yeah, we had one bad loan.
And so what happened in that case? You just didn't get the money back?
Just didn't get the money back.
And it was that it really didn't produce that much of a savings? Is that what?
It was meant to produce revenue. It was actually a broadband project, and it may still, but when I left, it had not gotten to the point where the idea was we were expanding our broadband network with the idea that private or nonprofit organizations would be interested in paying us for that connection. And the projection was that would happen a lot faster than it did. So that was one loan that, when I left, was not in repayment status.
Okay. And then how long, once whatever dollars are allocated here today, once the budget starts, how long does it take the process to say, okay, this is a great idea, here's the funds that you're requesting?
It's usually from concept to approval.
Yep.
3-month process, and then the project gets started. The concept here is, this would be a non-lapsing fund, so the dollars would roll over year to year. The project may take 3 months, may take a year. They're all different.
Timeframes.
Yeah, and so that gets approved, and like I said, it's these projects are closely monitored throughout their life cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I share some of the comments of my colleague, the Council Vice President. I think this is a good idea. I am very supportive in principle. We do have to reinvent government, and the county executive has spoken repeatedly about his interest to do that. I know you have talked frequently about it. We share those goals on this side of the street, and we have to get to a point where we, figure out how to do more with less, not do less with more.
Right.
And unfortunately, that we haven't seen that, and to provide an opportunity to do that, I'm supportive of it. I do appreciate council staff's recommendation. I think getting the project off the ground, seeing how it works, seeing how it comes in, having a modest approach in what is an extremely tough budget, I think is the appropriate path to take. I think that this isn't a forever situation. If the applications that you receive are overwhelming and you have so many great ideas that you want to come back across the street and, we can see if we can find supplemental opportunities, I would be open to that. I also think that, at the next budget year, the goal is, I know your goal is to start off with all the money and then never ask for another appropriation again and have this be a self-supporting, self-sustaining program. And I understand the interest in that, but I also think there's an opportunity to deal with this on a 2-year basis. Start it now. It's going to take several months to get this started. My understanding from some conversations that we had several months back, you want to set up a committee to look at this.
Yep.
That's going to take some time to figure out who's on that committee, to get the applications in, to review those applications. And so this isn't even going to be a full year. And just looking at the numbers, the program has been in place that you established that seems to be doing well, and I appreciate your leadership in Baltimore, but 7 years, 11 projects. And so it's not as if there are dozens of projects that are being approved every year. The good news is hopefully you're getting a lot of applications and you're picking a few of the best ones, which I think is the secret to the success.
Yeah.
And so my view would be you're slightly above one a year. If we're somewhere at or close to the council staff's recommendation, it would allow you to do one or maybe more if they're smaller type of programs this year. And like I said, if you have 2 or 3 of those just absolutely transformational ideas that come from your different departments, then I think that there will be an opportunity down the road to figure out how we can ensure that something that is providing a cost savings to us that is tangible, that we could provide the funding to make it happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilman. I would just say a couple things. One is, my concern about 450,000 is there could easily be some great projects that come to us right away that cost more than that. We funded several above that level in Baltimore. And one of the concepts behind the Innovation Fund is that great ideas can come to you anytime, and you don't want to have to wait until the next budget cycle to get funding for a great idea. And I do think we can. We have a couple months before the fiscal year starts to get the committee set up, get the structure set up for this. So I think we'll be ready to go. And like I said, I've got. My observation is that Montgomery County government is going to generate a lot of great ideas. Our first year in Baltimore, we got 36 proposals. We only funded 3 in that first year. I'm hopeful that we'll have a similar response, and I worry that when we talk about supplementals, that can mean money coming out of the reserve, and I don't think that's the way we want to use the reserve fund. So that's why I ask that you consider a higher level of funding than what's recommended.
And I totally appreciate that. I don't think we have talked about taking money out of the reserve generally when we've been talking about supplementals. I could be mistaken there, but I'm not sure that has happened, at least in recent, non-catastrophic, economic, massive economic downturn situation. I don't think that is the standard, and I think we've been moving gradually up on that. I think the OPEB has been used as a reserve account, but that's a different situation. But 7 years, you've provided, in Baltimore at least, has provided $4.877 million total
Right.
in loans. This is 1 year, which would be maybe even less than a year, depending on how long it takes to get the applications in, get them set up, and we're talking about $2 million. So I think my view is I think council staff has struck the right balance here. Like I said, if my colleagues were interested, I'd be open to moving up a little bit, but I think that $2 million is more than is necessary to start. And if those amazing ideas come through, I think that there is an opportunity to make adjustments, and at the end of the year or mid-year or whatever the case may be before the next budget cycle, if there are opportunities to save tens of millions of dollars that are once in a generation and can't wait until the next budget cycle, then I think that there will be opportunities to work together in partnership, because I do believe we all share the same philosophical goal, and I credit you for your willingness to push for innovation, push for new ideas, to provide opportunities for the workforce to come to you with the ideas from the bottom up and not from the top down.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando?
Thank you, Council President, and thank you for letting me join you all today. Good to see you, Andrew.
Good to see you.
I'm glad we're doing this. I think, as you know, we've talked about the role of innovation
Yes.
funds in multiple contexts. I was very involved in the Investing in Innovation Fund at the Department of Education.
Right.
And I think this is a good path to be going down to achieve efficiency and innovation and good ideas. So I'm glad we're doing it. I did want to ask, are there projects that you know just right off the bat, that are coming down the pike if this?
Well, I have some concepts, and I want to caution that I mentioned these need to go through rigorous
Sure, of course. Yeah,
review.
yeah.
But just a couple that I've received. One, buying some equipment to recycle pallet wrap at the Department of Liquor Control. It goes to waste now, but there's actually value in it. Our new procurement director is interested in robotic process automation. There's a lot of repetitive processes in procurement that he thinks he can streamline through using this technology. There are also some concepts in alternative transit solutions that would save money. And so again, I don't yet have costs for these. That's part of the rigorous process that has to happen.
Right.
But that's a flavor of what I've already received from our departments.
That's helpful. And the other point I was going to make quickly was that, one of the things we did in I3 was you had levels of evidence that were associated with the amount of the grant, right? And I would encourage, not that you weren't going to do this, but
Yeah.
if something's like
To
a
manage the
proven
risk.
idea, smart meters, like you mentioned, and here's your example,
Yeah.
that's an old idea. That's pretty proven to save money. So you could
Yes.
probably invest heavily in that. But something that is less proven, well, to manage risk would probably be invested in less. And I hope that we're structuring it in a way that factors that risk in.
Yes, and as we learned, innovation means something different in different contexts.
Right.
And we're looking for breakthrough, disruptive innovation. You get some of that. You also get some tried and true innovations that have been proven in other places, aren't brand new, but are new to your organization. So.
And that segues my last point. I was just going to make that I hope we're still achieving those innovations in the regular budgeting process. Like if there's things that we should be doing that are going to save money anyway, I would hope that as we're coming in, as we move to outcomes-based budgeting, that we're just doing that anyway.
Of course, yeah. The idea here is, these ideas can happen at any time.
Right.
Having a fund, I think, gets people really focused.
Right. No, I agree.
And particularly on things that have an actual return on investment to the budget.
Well, thank you, and that's helpful. I look forward to supporting when it comes to full council. Obviously, defer to my colleagues on the amount.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think this has been very informative. I would agree that it is very important to look at issues of innovation and have the ability, the flexibility to address those. Dr. Torres mentioned how, this committee in the past, especially through ITPCC, felt so
Right.
strongly that, we have been building up precisely, and there have been some extraordinary achievements through that particular process. I would agree that, there obviously needs to be some planning that's going to go on, et cetera. So for me, I think, I was thinking about $1 million versus $2 million, given the fact that there needs to be, I think, some planning. We're still working on even making some appointments for the administration. There's a lot of processes that have to be put in place. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that, if you're going to have a fund, you need to be able to signal that this is a serious, program, that this is not something that the money might be there, may not be there. So I feel comfortable with $1 million. And of course, it depends on, the support of my colleagues in terms of what we would recommend to the full council. Councilmember Friedson.
I was very comfortable going with the staff recommendation, and I still am comfortable going with the staff recommendation, but I'd be willing to meet somewhere in the middle. If others were interested in like the $650,000 range, I understand you funded some projects, as you mentioned, that might have been over the 450. I wouldn't want to not be able to fund, one large project if that were the case. I think there's probably more likelihood in some, a couple of the smaller projects, but I'd be comfortable to 650. I'm not sure I'd be comfortable going higher than that personally.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
You probably need Councilmember Rice here like it's an
know.
auction. I got
I know.
650, let's go. Yeah, I got it. I had thought at 750, candidly, I thought that would be something that would be enough to get us started.
We can meet in the middle then.
What'd you say?
We could meet in the
Do
middle.
I get,
Okay,
do
all
I
right,
get to
okay.
bid?
What?
All right.
Do I get to bid?
Yeah,
Can I just say I met in the middle twice? I'm not sure I'm not a very good negotiator.
yeah,
but-
you're not, actually you are, but yeah.
All right, so you want to move?
Yeah, I move for 750, please.
Okay, so I think it'll be a 3-0 recommendation for 750 to start, and then we will see how we do with this really wonderful new approach to looking at issues of innovation and realignments and things like that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so our next item is Charter Review Commission NDA. Ms. Myhill is here, and this is another, I think it's going to be another very controversial item in terms of finding the right level of funding.
Very spendy.
I mean, we're going to be here for a while.
It's an increase of $1,000.
I mean, that's extraordinary. All right, Ms. Myhill. Oh, I hear some objections already.
What you have before you is the Charter Review Commission NDA. As you know, the Charter Review Commission will be appointed soon, and they are scheduled to issue reports every even numbered year in May. And so this year they will be, or next fiscal year rather, they will be issuing a report, which is why the budget is increased this year.
Mr. Mia, anything you want to add?
Mia, Office of Management Budget, nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Okay, without objection, I think we will approve this $1,150 for the Charter Review Commission. Awesome. All right, so for item number 4, we will now take up the FY20 operating budget for the Office of Intergovernmental Relations. So those of you who are here for that, please come by. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, Ms. Myhill, what are our decision points here?
Your decision point is how much you want to fund. The executive's FY20 recommended amount is approximately $1.15 million. And council staff, it's essentially a same services budget, and council staff is recommending approval.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention that, in our council retreat, there was quite a bit of conversation about, the council's desire to take a fresh look at how we handle the state ledge process. Obviously, it's a very difficult process in the sense that we're trying to keep track of everything that is going on, at the same time identifying those issues of great interest, especially policy areas for the council and the administration, and how do we, address our priorities. That has been, really important. And because of that, the council has, for I think at least since I've been here, had conversations about different iterations of the council specifically being able to be able to discuss, to have time to understand the specifics of certain legislation. Our Monday state ledge processes sometimes are a bit stressful because it's difficult to have all of that information to make informed decisions, et cetera. And it is a very important aspect of what we do. And I think that, on Circle 2, one of the things that jumped out at me, and to be honest, I had not necessarily focused on that, but, we do have some metrics, some measures, and for example, on percent of state priorities fully realized, FY17, we were at 80%, and then we kind of went through, to 61% on FY18, 19, 20, 21. And I think that speaks to the fact that we need to figure out this priorities setting process and how we track that and how we hold ourselves accountable for achieving what we need to achieve vis-a-vis our priorities. There is a work group that has been formed, and, we'll be talking in the summer, but just wanted to share that because I think there would be some really robust and really wonderful recommendations, especially with new council members who are coming at this kind of with a fresh attitude and fresh look to see how we can, keep up with what has become a really important aspect. I will have to say that, this year we feel very, very happy and grateful that the delegation really worked so hard to bring us additional resources, and you were front and center in trying to, let us know how it was going and trying to get all that squared away, obviously, with the Kerwin Commission. And, that fund for education has been so important, and some additional funds also, thanks to the leadership of Senator Kagan. I mean, I think this year we can say, honestly, that a lot of that effort really produced quite a bit of outcomes for us. So we're truly grateful for that, and then we'll be, we'll be obviously in touch in terms of what comes out of this council work group regarding our state legislation process and all of that. Let me see. I think I have Councilmember Ofiza.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to some of those robust conversations. I think this is a really good opportunity just to assess everything that we're doing, and I think this is one of many examples of that as an institution on the council, as a county government, how we work together with the departments and how we work together with the executive branch and how we work together with each other as colleagues and with our individual offices. So I look forward to that robust and serious and important conversation. I did want to mention an issue of significant concern to my district is the airspace consultant, which is part of this budget, the $125,000. I just got a note from Ken Hartman, who is walking up to the table, and I understand, Mr. Hartman, that MOU was signed this morning, I believe, possibly. Is that accurate?
The contract between Montgomery County and Arlington was signed by Arlington yesterday. So it was transmitted to us, and now we're going to get our signatures on it and finalize.
Okay, it's imminent.
It's imminent.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Well, let me know once the ink has dried, and obviously this is a long process that started at last year's budget cycle. That the council, which I very much appreciate the previous council's commitment to this. This is something that affects 20,000 residents every single day. It has taken far longer than I know anybody on the council would have wanted when they appropriated the $125,000. Our partners in Arlington, some of whom are my friends, some of whom are former Montgomery County residents, took a little bit longer to get through this than we might have hoped, but I am committed to making sure that this happens, and I just want to make sure that we have a commitment that that $125,000 is going to carry over from FY19 into FY20, that we have the money, that it will be available, and that it doesn't revert back.
I believe that there is that type of a commitment. It was a one-time only expenditure, and I think it will be encumbered before the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a new appropriation, but just to make sure that the
Right.
appropriation from FY19 carries over into FY20, and that now that we have the MOU signed later this morning and the ink is dry, that we can make sure that we actually move forward with this, because this is just the part of the process that allows the process, and we need to actually go from process to people and actually get somebody on board and spend this money, because this money was put in place to leverage our $125,000 with Arlington's $125,000 to bring in an expert, which both jurisdictions lack, to be able to do the work that we have really relied on volunteers to do, which hasn't been fair to them and has continued the huge challenges that we've had in our community. So look forward to that happening. And Mr. Hartman, thank you for continuing that work, and look forward to partnering with you all to make sure that it happens as quickly as possible now that we finally have that this last hurdle out of the way.
Okay, so we do have a recommendation to approve the FY20 Office of Intergovernmental Relations operating budget as recommended by the executive, which is an amount of $1 million, $150,199. Without objection, I think we are approved. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to item number, I can't keep up. It is item number 5, as my colleagues are saying here very loudly. And this item is a work session for the committee to make recommendations on resolution regarding setting credits for FY20 in order to keep property tax revenue at the so-called charter limit. And so for that, we do have with us Mr. Sesker. It's so good to see you. And we will get right into this conversation and whatever decision points we have as well.
Thank you. I'm glad to be joined by my colleagues from the Department of Finance and the Office of Management and Budget, who, as always, do great work in working with us on matters of fiscal policy and supporting the decisions that the GO committee makes. I'm sure that you may have questions for me and for them in a few moments. First, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to provide a little context about the decision or decisions that are made every year with respect to the property tax. Every year, the council makes a decision about the credit for the income tax offset. This is a credit that has been in place for more than a decade, and for most of the last decade has been set at $692 per eligible household per year. Like every tax credit, it's something that benefits some subpopulation of Montgomery County, shifting a portion of the overall tax burden from that part of Montgomery County's tax base to other parts of Montgomery County's tax base. Unlike many of the other tax credits that we have, however, this is one that benefits a very large number of households and individuals and tax accounts in Montgomery County, and I'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. As I said, this is a decision that's made every year. Any decision, including a decision to maintain the status quo, is certainly one that has consequences that in the parlance of people who observe local government creates winners and losers relative to some baseline, relative to the policy that was proposed by the county executive, relative to the previous year, et cetera. Certainly, this is very much one of those policies. You certainly could decide today to leave the credit where it is at $692, which is where it's been, as I said, since starting with the budget that was approved for FY11. You might also decide to ultimately defer a decision this year with respect to the FY20 credit until a full council discussion that would be occurring several days from now. You might decide to defer it until reconciliation when you have a better idea of what resources are going to be necessary to fund priorities, or you may decide that you want to have a more fulsome discussion about this issue following the budget. And again, we can sort of come back to that decision timeline after we've talked just a little bit more about the context and the issues. So again, what does a credit do? A credit shifts a portion of the overall tax burden from one subpopulation to another. We have a lot of credits in Montgomery County that do various different things, shift money in one direction or another. Several of those benefit on the individual side, for example, senior citizens, shifting a portion of the burden off of seniors who own their homes onto non-seniors population. We have tax credits that benefit businesses in particular geographic areas. We have credit programs that benefit businesses in particular industries. We, for many years, even had a tax credit that benefited based on the fact that only one company met the criteria, benefited simply one company, and that was Discovery Communications, which received a benefit of roughly $1 million a year at the expense of all other taxpayers in Montgomery County. Each of those is a policy decision, and we sort of, the council obviously views each of those decisions both individually in the context of whether or not this is sort of a good idea, and also on an individual decision basis, and also within the sort of context of like the broader expenditures and tax burdens of Montgomery County. Is this something that is going to change the burdens significantly? Is it something that's going to achieve some policy objective that the council is trying to achieve, or to protect a subpopulation that the county is trying to protect, or to foster growth in an industry that the county is trying to foster growth in? But This tax credit, as I alluded to earlier, is actually the most common credit. There are, and if you want some more precise numbers, I'm sure David Platt, to my right from the Department of Finance, has these at the, in his head. There are roughly 350,000 households in Montgomery County. Not all of them benefit from this credit, but about 250,000 of those households every year, or a little more than that, are actually eligible to benefit from this tax credit every year. About 240 to 245,000 actually get the credit every year. Not every household that is potentially eligible receives the credit every year because there's friction within the economy, people moving in, moving out, so that's part of the reason those numbers are very similar, but not exactly the same. There are roughly, 350,000 tax accounts, roughly, in Montgomery County as well. A change to this credit, actually creates a benefit for roughly 225,000 households in Montgomery County. The benefit that some of those households would receive is small. Other households, the farther away they are from our break-even point, which we can talk about in a few moments, the more they would benefit. So that's roughly 7/8 of all eligible households would benefit from an increase in the credit. About 2/3 of households overall would benefit from an increase in the credit, but that does shift some of the tax burden to other actors within the economy and other constituents in the county. And again, I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. The decision that you make on the credit does occur within a context, and two important factors in that context are inflation and inequality. Costs are going up, consumer costs are going up, healthcare costs are going up, housing values are going up, housing costs are going up. And as you all know, the forces of globalization and technological change and all of these sorts of things have created a situation in which more and more of our population is being sort of left behind, and less of the benefits of growth are being shared by people outside of the very top of the income bracket. And regulatory and tax policy changes, including those that were made in 2017 in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, many of those benefited disproportionately people at the top and hurt people at the bottom. Consumer prices have increased by nearly 16% since the credit was first set at $692, meaning that the credit that the council approves every year is worth a little bit less each year than it was the previous year. Fundamentally, a big reason for staff's recommendation to increase this credit is to restore that value that has eroded over time, and also, beyond the sort of specifics of the actions that the GO committee would recommend and the council ultimately needs to take on the FY20 budget, to really have a conversation about making sure that within the context of the decisions that this council can make, to sort of slow the impact of inflation and inequality on Montgomery County households, that the council is able to make decisions to make the tax code as progressive as possible and to restore as much of that value as possible over time. The gap, I did already touch on that. Within that context, the income tax offset credit, as I said, benefits is something that about 240,000 households receive every year. About an increase to the credit would benefit about 220,000 of those households. It would, to some degree, increase costs for people whose homes are at the high end of the value scale. And that is because if the council is increasing the credit and remaining at the charter limit, the cost of the revenue expenditure for the credit would be offset by a rate increase. And that rate increase, because the credit is set at a dollar amount, its value as a percentage of the property tax bills of individual homeowners is smaller for people with high value homes than it is for people with low value homes. And so ultimately, if the rate is increasing, the rate on value ends up having more of an impact than an increase in the credit for those who have homes above a certain value. That break-even point is in the $800,000 to $850,000 range this year. I think last year I calculated it out to the dollar, and it was $806,000 or something like that last year. So this year it's probably a little bit higher, but not appreciably different. Again, among the households that are eligible, that would mean that about 220,000 households have homes that are valued at less than that break-even amount. In the grand scheme of things, with a county with a $1.8 billion budget, the total amount of property tax burden that would be shifted through a policy change like this is relatively small. I'm guessing less than 1%. If committee members have some more or would like some more information or some more robust discussion about that, that's certainly information that we could pull together for the full council discussion. The fact that it is less than 1% doesn't mean that it isn't a consequential decision or isn't one that would be perceived as consequential by individual property owners. Obviously, with 350 to 400,000 tax accounts in Montgomery County, a lot of people have different experiences. Some people see their assessments go up, other people see their assessments go down. Some taxpayers are inside of municipalities that are increasing their tax rates, and others are not. And so everybody sort of has a little bit of a different experience. One thing that is sort of constant, regardless of who the taxpayers are, is that tax bills and the decisions that the council makes with respect to setting tax rates and the credits are, for many taxpayers, impregnable. They don't necessarily understand the portion of their tax bill or the portion of their increase from year to year that is attributable to like the specific decisions that you're making about the levy or about the credit, or even decisions that you're making with respect to expenditures. For them, what they see is a number. And what they see that their property tax bill has maybe gone up. And the fact that it has gone up because their property has, in many cases, as has been the case for the last several years, because their property has become more valuable, doesn't change the fact that they experience it and perceive it as a year-to-year tax increase. Whether they would be more likely to do that if you increase the credit and increase the rate, it's possible that many people will perceive it that way. Certainly as a staff person who's been responding to taxpayer questions and concerns for several years, I understand that there is sort of it is very difficult for most people to take the time to look at their tax bill and to sort of think about the budget and the decisions that you all are faced with every year, and to come to an accurate understanding of the impacts of individual decisions. One of the things that I wanted to communicate to you, however, in this packet and that you can see in the tables, is that this year, in a period of rising assessments generally, both for credit eligible and non-credit eligible properties, that the actual driver for people who are experiencing an increase in their property tax bill over the previous year is that change in value, the change in assessment. It is because their property has become more valuable that their property tax bill will go up. The decisions that you're going to make with respect to rate and credit are actually, if you're not at the extreme ends of those decisions, are relatively speaking minor in comparison to the increase in value for each property. A lot of this is laid out in the packet, and in just a minute I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'm sure David will as well, but I just wanted to very quickly boil down who the winners and losers, so to speak, would be in any decision that would be made with respect to increasing the credit and maintaining revenue at the charter limit. The households that would benefit would be people who own their own home and live in it as a primary residence, i.e. more than 6 months a year, and whose homes are worth less than some break-even amount that's going to fall in that 800 to 850,000 range. That's 220,000 households in Montgomery County. Again, the farther away from that they are, i.e. people with a $250,000 home, are going to benefit, the more they're going to benefit. The closer to that break-even point they are, the less they're going to benefit. So obviously the advantage there is that you're putting most of the benefit to the people who presumably, because this is a property tax, not an income tax, so we don't know necessarily what their means are, presumably are the people who need it the most. The beneficiaries also would be the constituents, the intended beneficiaries and populations that would benefit from services and programs that you might provide with the additional $1.7 million, which is, you know, 0.1% or something like that, in terms of the total property tax revenue that the county executive sent over. So those beneficiaries, again, you know, by and large, given, you know, my experience working with you on the reconciliation lists, those are programs and services that benefit those with the greatest need in Montgomery County. The losers, so to speak, in pursuing this change in policy would be the owners of non-eligible properties. That includes residential rental properties, second homes, owners of second homes, as well as owners of commercial properties. And in some cases, the businesses themselves that are responsible for the taxes if they have a net lease rather than a full service lease and they're responsible for those taxes, they would end up paying a higher rate. Again, you know, in most cases, probably small relative to the impact that a change in assessment is going to have on their taxes from year to year. And finally, renters of residential properties as well, and commercial properties could be impacted when they go to re-up their leases, to the extent that the cost of the additional tax, rather than being internalized into land value, i.e. rather than having it sort of reduce the value of the land a little bit, ends up being passed through by the owner of the property to the lessee. And, you know, again, I've laid all of that out in the packet, and you can see what that impact would be. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the packet. I'm sure that David is as well, and again, you know, he is probably, you know, knows most of the sort of numbers that you would be interested in by heart.
Thank you. Mr. Platt, can you share with us why the executive make that recommendation of the 692, which is kind of consistent with what we've done in the past?
I'm sorry.
You share with us why the executive recommended the 692 credit level?
My position on the 692 to the $800, is that your, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to understand why the executive made the decision to recommend the 692 level versus 800.
I don't think officially no position has been made on that.
Were there any analysis done?
We did the analysis on that, as was Mr. Sesker has put into the packet, on the impacts of the estimated bills, and we looked at a number of options.
So on the packet, it says, this year, the county executive proposed a credit of 692. The credit has been set at 692 for each year since 2011. So you don't know why the executive made that recommendation?
I believe because historically we've kept it at 692
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Great. No, that's all right. So I just want to note a little bit of just my own position on this. As I shared with, and I've said before, we have decided in the summer to engage in a wholesale, I think, review of many of our fiscal policy decisions. This year, we have been faced with quite a number of interesting decisions vis-a-vis OPEB, reserves, and there's been a lot of conversation about, you know, taking a step back to look at where those targets are, what they mean. Should we begin to address some structural issues in a wholesale fashion? And so the idea was that since we're all kind of new in terms of a new administration and a new council, that we would take a little bit of time to be very thoughtful. As it was described, every year the GO committee has to make a decision regarding this tax credit, and we understand that it does have a minimal impact in both ways. In the scheme of a budget, you know, just previous item, we saved $1 million. That's going to help fund the reconciliation list. I've worked very hard to lead the charge so that we could find the money for MCPS and not affect our ability to fund the reconciliation list. That was about $5 million, well, total 10. And the idea is that, this is a budget that has a lot of pieces. So I actually, I appreciate the analysis, and it's one that we have looked at every single year. But we've also, some of us have stated that we do not want this particular year to raise taxes in any shape, way, or form, because we do want to focus very, very intently on issues of economic development. And we have been engaged in all this conversation and all this deliberation about equity as well. And part of that means that we have to look at how we expand our tax base in order to provide opportunities for everyone. There's been a lot of energy around the Renters Alliance trying to figure out how to support those who cannot even afford rents. And so there's just so much that goes into this conversation. And I just don't want, for the record, to be left out there that, that this particular decision that is just one aspect of this entire budget somehow addresses all issues of equity and populations that are being left behind, et cetera, because this is a much broader conversation and a much broader set of decisions that this council has to take. One of them that wasn't too comfortable was having to say to our employee unions that, one particular negotiated pay raise was a bit too much, and we want it to go back because we're trying to address issues of sustainability in a much broader way. So I just want to say that because in the scheme of everything that we are doing, and I understand that narrative is everything, this is a very minor component, but I think in totality it could have a very important and play an important role, but that is not what we have done. So that's why for me, making this decision without having the entire and addressing the rest of all of those fiscal policy decisions just doesn't seem right in terms of just having already been on record saying that I would not support a tax increase. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think it is important, and it's not as if this council has not examined this time and time again every year. And those of us who, again, have put ourselves out there to do whatever we can to affect and impact inequality, et cetera, we also understand that there is a larger set of decision points that we have to make to get to that. So with that, let me turn it over to Vice President, I thought it was Katz. No, it's Friedson, Vice President Friedson. Just kidding.
I'm happy. Yeah. As I said, I think it was it feels like in budget days, it was like a year and a half ago, but it was actually 2 days ago. She knows Vice President Katz. She's served with Vice President Katz, and I, ma'am, am no Vice President Katz. But
You're very lucky.
depending on the day, that's a good thing or a bad thing. But it is what it is. I am who I am. First of all, I'd like to associate myself with the Council President's comments, and I do agree with you. Secondly, I'd like to say that I do appreciate the fact that the county executive made a commitment that he wasn't going to raise taxes. He said this year. I'm hopeful that that will continue, but he made a strong commitment to the public that he wasn't going to raise taxes. So I do appreciate the fact that he didn't in this particular case, and think that that is a commitment that he made, and I appreciate in this particular situation, it's a commitment that he's kept. And so I think that he deserves credit for that, and I think that that is the reason, at least from my perspective. I don't want to read into his motivations, but it would seem to me that fulfilling that commitment is a reason why he has kept it at the historical number that it has been at for the last many years. I also would like to say, Mr. Sesker, thank you for your analysis. This was the best packet I've read since I've been here. I haven't been here for that long, but this was the most thorough, informative, in-depth deep dive into a very comprehensive and oftentimes convoluted policy issue. When you add the charter limit to property taxes, you create a very difficult to unpack policy issue. And so I think you did a terrific job, and I was grateful for it. And I read every word and intently took to heart everything that you included in the packet and the varying and competing policy goals and policy consequences that come with these decisions. I do agree with you and with the council president that in the scheme of the and magnitude of the policy decisions that we make and what fiscal impact they have on the budget and on individual taxpayers, this has a very modest one. But I also certainly believe, as the council president has stated, that perception is reality. And although the reality is small, the perception, I think, would be quite large, particularly when we are doing all the other work that we are doing and trying to be as intentional as possible, including the work group, as noted, and the conversations that are to happen this summer to take a really serious and comprehensive look at our fiscal picture and how we move forward in a sustainable way. And I think that commitment is something that is extremely important. I also wanted to just note a couple things. One is, while I certainly applaud and share in the concern about the progressive, the interest in a progressive tax code, which we have, by the way, quite a progressive tax code, but that could be more progressive at a time of growing inequality. The property tax is not a particularly progressive tax. It's far less progressive than income taxes, and the reason why is many people, particularly in District 1, who would be disproportionately affected by this change, are not wealthy themselves. They live in homes that are extremely valuable, but they don't want to leave their homes in order to capitalize on the increase in value. And so while it is good to live in a property that is worth a lot of money, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to pay your bills. And it does you even less good when your tax bills go up and you don't have any more money to pay them. And so even though it is a modest increase for them, I think that that is an increased challenge that we have. It's, I represent the oldest demographic district in the county that would be disproportionately affected by this, with residents who have, on average, lived in their houses the longest. And so the impact on those residents, particularly our aging adult residents who we want to help age in place, I think this would be a step going in the other direction. I think there are other avenues to have a robust conversation of how we find opportunities to serve those who we need to help more. As the council president noted, I think that this would have a small impact and would create a significant disruption, and I think some level of distrust when we've committed to not raise taxes, and this effectively would be a tax increase. And I also think that we need to be mindful of the fact that our renters are growing. And while unintended, a consequence of this, as noted by you, Mr. Sesker, is that this would have some impact on our renting population, which unfortunately, because it's become so expensive to own a home, because those property values are growing, renting has become a growing portion of our population, and so we need to be mindful of that. So with that said, without belaboring the point, I share in the council president's view that we should not be moving forward, and I hope the committee, well, I guess we have 2 votes, but I hope the committee moves forward with that recommendation.
Thank you. Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm in agreement. I associate myself with what has already been said. This does lower taxes for many, slightly, and it raises taxes for some as well, which makes it a very nice and confusing situation. And it's, but taxes are based on assessments, and both the council president and sort of vice president, whatever his title is, said exactly what I had written in my notes, that in many cases, this will affect seniors in a lot of cases. I know many people, and there's plenty of people that know many people, who bought their homes 25 years ago. Their assessments have gone up. Whatever they paid for their home, that's what they paid for it. They're paying taxes on a much more expensive home, and they couldn't afford to sell their home and buy it back again. And that's what we're doing when we're doing something like this. Someone that lives and I guess the average home now is about $450,000, $500,000 in Montgomery County. Well, a lot of those homes were purchased for $100,000, but people are $150,000, and people are living in them. So that's one of my great concerns. I'm certainly concerned about how the commercial side would have to take a larger hit for taxes. This is at a time when our economic development, to say it as nice as we can, is far from good. The vacancy rates are not what any of us would want, and we're working on that. But that would cause that another problem, and anybody that has those triple net leases, which most of the people I know get triple net leases anymore, would have to pay a higher tax. So that in itself is another concern. And for the renters, and I don't have to restate that, but we're saying that even for someone that's renting in a $250,000 value unit, which, you know, I don't know how many are at that level and how many homes are at a higher level, but that would be about $33 more a year, $2.75 a month. Someone that's living in that $500,000 unit or $400,000 unit, obviously it would be more, and that drives them to a different place. So I believe that we do need to look at this comprehensively. Jacob, no, and to Andrew's point, your packet was certainly extremely well written, and I sincerely appreciate it. But I believe at this point we need to do it in a comprehensive way. We need to figure out how we're doing, how we're affording government in a lot of different ways. And I think that at this point it should be the 692. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Joando.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you to my colleagues for, again, allowing me to jump in. And Jacob, good to see you. And I also want to add to the chorus that this was a joy to read and to work with you on this going back months, and I appreciate the recommendation. And, you know, this will come before the full council, and I plan to support it. And I know at least one other council member, Councilmember Reamer, is supporting it as well. So it was not in vain, the discussion that we had. And I just think, to some of the points that you made, the original purpose of this tax credit in 2011 was to provide relief to middle-class homeowners. As you mentioned, tax credits are choices. Who do you want to help? And someone has to bear that burden. Obviously, in the case of the president, he made horrible choices to benefit very few at the expense of very many, and has hurt many of our residents here in Montgomery County, whether it be the standard deduction and other things, limiting that. And he helped certain, you know, large businesses and very wealthy people. And at a time when here in Montgomery County in particular, we have increasing wealth inequality. Many of my colleagues, Councilmember Friedson, we talk about this all the time. I think he had a great line that he's running to relieve the squeeze, is what I think he said, ease the squeeze. Sorry, I messed it up, ease the squeeze. I talked about the Montgomery County Promise and how do you make sure those things, being able to afford to live here, having a great school, good quality of life, how do you make sure that's available for continuing generations? And those are things that we're really struggling with now. And I think when you have an opportunity to slightly and modestly increase the tax credit that will benefit over 220,000 households, I mean a significant portion of our households, even if it is in a modest way, I think it is the right signal to send. That we understand that things are harder, not easier, that $75 in your pocket a year if you own a home is $250,000. That makes a difference. And just to give the other end, if you own a home that's $1.25 million, you pay $60 extra a year, $5 a month, and that relative impact to you at the 1.25 is much less than the relative benefit on the other end of the spectrum. And I think that's a message we want to send. Is this a panacea? Of course not. Are we going to need to take other decisions and have other discussions over the summer about how we are sustainable going forward and help our communities, our renters, our middle-income homeowners, everybody in between do better? Are we going to have to grow our economy? Absolutely. But having worked at Discovery, who received that $1 million tax credit, we make, I think, decisions, sometimes they're good and bad, to benefit certain people. And I think the people who have not been benefited enough are the people at the middle and lower income of our tax code. So I know the committee's going to take its action, but I just wanted to come and speak to this and say I think it is worth raising it to 800, which is, again, is a modest increase to keep with the original intent and value of this tax credit, which has diminished in value. If we're saying that it's a good thing for people, when the previous council passed it in 2011, I think we should make sure it keeps its value. So I appreciate all your work on this and look forward to discussing it when it comes to full council.
thank you so much. So I think that what I'm hearing is that it's a 3-0 to stay with the executive, with the recommendation made by the executive to keep it at 692. And of course, we will have another robust conversation in full council. But again, I want to reiterate for the record that we have all pretty much agreed to have a robust conversation about fiscal policy this summer. These are, very interesting issues. I remember when we had to make that difficult decision in 2016 to raise property taxes in order to reduce class sizes, and we would say that this would only be this very modest amount for homeowners. That didn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it was a property tax increase, and term limits occurred, which was good for some people. But the reality of it all is that this is a very complicated issue. And we should not take this lightly or extrapolate that somehow this is going to be an extraordinary, solution when this is a budget that every single year we have to, take into consideration. Nonetheless, I will acknowledge that there are some issues that we did not expect in terms of revenue projections. That we thought that perhaps after the Great Recession and everything that we did, that things would be a little bit better. And looking at the economy nationally, we would think everything would be a little bit better. But there's still some outlier issues out there, and we need to do, I think, an extraordinary, comprehensive look at what we do and how we do it, and what are our targets, and what are those fiscal policy decisions, especially now that we are on track of meeting the 10% for our reserves. I think it is time to take a step back. So really appreciate it. And Mr. Sesker, I just, missed you, because your analysis is always extraordinarily thorough, and you really do put things in exactly its order, and always enjoyed just being in awe of your extraordinary talent. And I don't just say that because, of course, you did live in Venezuela and you love arepas. That's not what I'm saying that. But just really do appreciate seeing you, and appreciate your packet as well, and have no doubt that you have a lot to contribute as well when we engage in this very, comprehensive and thorough examination of where we are. I'm actually looking forward to that because, every year we have to kind of try to process all of this and hope that, decisions are the wise ones. So we'll be using your expertise, I know, very well as well. So with that,
Okay.
I think that we are done with this item. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you.
Anybody was concerned whether the air conditioning is working in this building.
The air conditioner in this building has been working very well, so much so that yesterday at the 7th floor, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to walk after being so frozen for like almost 3 hours. So
There was issues, but there was issues.
before it was too hot, and now it's just too cold.
Yeah.
It is
A
what
lot
it
of
is.
Goldilocks.
All right. Item number 6. So thank you, Councilmember Joando. Thank you so much. So item number 6 is a work session. This is a continuation conversation as well on community engagement cluster. We have our
Good morning. I
group of
just want
folks.
to start by saying that yesterday, the Fed committee, they didn't get through all of their items, so they weren't able to vote on the transfer coming out of the incubator NDA to fund the regional business hub position. So council staff recommends that we postpone discussion on this item until the Fed committee can finalize their recommendation on the transfer. They're scheduled to meet tomorrow. So this item would be postponed and come before the full council.
Excellent. Okay, so I know that there were a couple of outstanding issues that we wanted to discuss, and one of them had to do with providing some additional capacity for the advisory groups, and specifically the issue of the Caribbean and African, continental African community. We wanted to know how we could make that a full position, right? Because it was a half position. Is that? Well, I
So-
can't remember, so if you can
The,
let us
the
know.
position that's currently vacant was a half-time position. It was a joint position for the African Affairs and Caribbean Liaison. Right now, they have two contractors filling the role of that position. So council staff had recommended that we add money to add a part-time community outreach manager position for the African Affairs. So the vacant position that is remaining in the budget would be able to be filled by the Caribbean group.
All right, Ms. Fu.
Good morning. Before I get to that specific recommendation, I just wanted to note for the record, because it was included in your packet, that there was a letter in question that was addressed from both the African Affairs Advisory Group and the Caribbean American Advisory Group. And I just want to go on the record to state that I have met with both groups in the same room at the same time, and the leadership maintains that they had no prior knowledge of the letter. They did not write the letter, and the stated facts and recommendations that were put forth in the letter are not wholly accurate, and that is not what their recommendations are.
Okay, but you're, as a director, as the new director, and I understand that, I appreciate that clarification, but to be honest with you, it doesn't really, I don't feel that that's really relevant to this conversation, right? I mean, what we are acknowledging is that as the county has grown significantly, that when you look at, demographic data, which is, I think, what we use in order to strengthen our community's partnership cohort, we've seen a growth in the continental African community. We have seen a growth in the Caribbean community, which spills over into the Latino community as well. And I, for a long time, have been wondering how come we have these like part-time contractors, right? So I appreciate the clarification, but, I think separate from whatever occurred, I know as council members, this council member has always wondered and wants to move forward with a much more, complete and robust complement of folks. I will also add that it's been my concern for such a long time that in places like Washington, D.C., their approach to addressing support for their very, very diverse community, it's so much more extraordinary. And I see this as a really good opportunity for us to then take a look at that and be bold. I mean, for too long, we have been timid around how we provide the support, and it's been somewhat, in my opinion, sanitized, right? So this provides an opportunity for us to get real on truly being that facilitator for so many in our communities, because I'll be honest, not a lot of people even know about these advisory groups, right? For too long, they have been very ceremonial and very symbolic, et cetera, and that doesn't help us. I mean, that kind of investment should be used to truly go in there and facilitate the engagement and the activity, and for us to start seeing it. So I just want to offer that, because now that you're in this role and you have been so amazing in your previous role, I just want to express that that's kind of like what I'm hoping to see moving forward. So I appreciate this opportunity and our staff for coming forward with at least this proposal.
Yes, and thank you for that. And maybe I should have started by saying that while I don't necessarily why I don't necessarily disagree with that recommendation, the advisory groups just wanted me to go on the record to state that because the letter was addressed in their name. And so I was just doing that on behalf of the advisory groups. And so, setting aside the letter, there's no question that during that meeting that, both communities that are represented by the African Affairs Advisory Group and the Caribbean American Advisory Group both believe that they are in need in additional resources. So that piggybacks on everything that you just said. So getting back to the recommendation from the council staff, so while it was the previous position of our office and the county executive to preserve the Office of Community Partnerships budget as it existed from the previous fiscal year into this fiscal year, and preserve the liaisons as it was structured. Again, I just want to note that those decisions were made because we believed that there was an equitable distribution of resources considering the budget constraints that we had. So that being said, we do appreciate that the council is considering adding resources to enhance the work of our office. We appreciate that very much. But I would advise and ask that you consider that any addition of resources to our office and in support of the liaison work be done so in a very thoughtful and holistic way. Otherwise, it will throw off an incredibly delicate balance of distribution of resources, and these are the communications that we've had with communities and the advisory groups over a number of years. So as I mentioned in the previous budget hearing, the Middle Eastern community and also the LGBTQ community have expressed their needs over the past several years to us for additional resources. The Middle Eastern community currently in our budget has a senior fellow that is serving as their liaison at 8 to 10 hours per week, in line with what was recommended for both the African and Caribbean communities. And there are no resources that have been allocated specifically for the LGBTQ communities at all. So while that recommendation for the halftime FTE would satisfy, I believe, both the African Affairs Advisory Group and the Caribbean American Advisory Group, I wanted to have this conversation with you today so that I can express to you that there is a very delicate balance of resources, and any additions to one community will have a domino and ripple effect on these other communities as well. So I just want to make a note of that.
I know, I appreciate that very much. I will also say that I think the goal is obviously to, as a new administration that is starting, I assume, is to evaluate the needs that exist and then begin to incrementally provide you with the resources so that you can then turn around and provide that kind of support and that kind of liaison work. I assume that data is used, I guess, to identify the growth in certain communities. And so this, although would be incremental, I assume the next year when you come back, you would have a proposal that would hopefully address the needs of these other communities, and proportionally, of course, because we don't have, unlimited resources. But I think going back to my original comment, that I believe also speaks to the need to do a much more robust and bold, take a bold step in addressing the issues of this very, very diverse county, because up until now, it's been done like this, and it's been done super symbolically, and, but something that is very comprehensive, perhaps is something to consider as we come back next year, as well. So let's see, Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you, Council President, and good to see you, Diane, and Ms. Fletcher, and good to see you as well. As you know, we've talked about this in meetings, and I'm a former member of AAG, and in my previous life, and obviously a second-generation African immigrant, and my wife's Jamaican immigrant. So these two communities are near and dear to my heart, as well with all of our great advisory groups and the outreach that we do, and the I think that this is a great proposal. I mean, if we talk about equity in these groups, you've had one of the previous liaisons that was before your time, but I know you've been on the team for a long time, but before your time as director, that was working for free. Was volunteering in the African role for 4 years, and so in African community has been a large community for a long time. So I think, to Council President's point, yes, you're in the job. Let's do an assessment. Come back to us next year with a robust proposal. But let's not stunt or backtrack on the work that's been done by particularly the AG and the Caribbean community in their groups. We've also talked, you and I, about the need to have some additional metrics and how we value and assess what we're doing, whether it be civic engagement metrics or how who's accessing community services from these communities. And so I just think those are things I'd like to see as well in the coming years, because there's just so much that I think more we could be doing, and I know that's why I'm glad and was enthusiastically to support you in this new role. But I wanted to speak to this as well, because I think it's critically important for these communities, having spoken to both of them as well, both of their chairs, that they get this separation and they each have a dedicated person. And my understanding is that this proposal from council staff will allow for there to be a halftime FTE for the African advisory group, and still allow for a halftime FTE for the Caribbean advisory group. Is that correct? Is that how you would allocate it if this recommendation? That's my question to you, I guess.
Right.
So
Would they
I would
still
have to
do
go back, I would have
contracting?
to go back to the Caribbean Advisory Group and say, you know, we have the opportunity to offer you a half-time FTE to serve as your liaison and consult with them. And if they approve, then we would go with what their recommendation is.
My understanding is that their primary focus was that they were okay with 10 hours a week, but they just wanted their own person. Is that your understanding?
That is partial, that is true, but their additional recommendation was that the current half-time FTE that we had, they wouldn't have been happy if that half-time FTE went to the African Affairs Advisory Group liaison position, and theirs only remained at 10 hours per week.
Yeah, they would have been okay with that.
They would not have been
They would
okay
not
with
have been
that.
okay with that,
Right.
okay, okay.
So I think
The
that, so,
recommendation in our packet, though, says that, let's see, council staff recommends that one part-time community outreach manager position be added to enhance African Affairs liaison support, right? But isn't there, and then that the position that is currently vacant and being backfilled by contractors be filled to provide liaison support for the Caribbean American community. So so this recommendation would result in what? In a full-time, in a 1.0 position for support for the African continental
No.
community and a
Th-
part-time?
This would create one additional part-time position
Right,
and
for
preserve the
Caribbean.
part-time position that's already existing but
Right.
vacant. So an African liaison position would be created, that would be half-time, and then the vacant half-time position, they could fill that and put the Caribbean liaison in that role.
Okay, but the African, I thought that the African community liaison wanted a full-time position, not to not
Ideally,
continue
but
to be
they-
part-time, but they would be okay
They
with
would be
part-time.
okay with the part-time.
Okay, so that would be okay
Yeah.
for part-time as long as you bifurcated the Caribbean and the African, because obviously they're not the same.
that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
Very different communities.
Yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
so this recommendation achieves that, is that right?
It does.
What's in the packet?
It
Yeah.
does, but like I said, the Caribbean American Advisory Group is not necessarily advocating for them to have a half-time FTE.
Okay, would you think,
so
as
what we would do
director,
is
do
go
you
back to
think that
them.
the Caribbean liaison or the Caribbean community would benefit from a part-time FTE?
Yes.
Okay, so any objection from my colleagues? No, wonderful. Okay, so we will move along with that. Thank you so much, Ms. Vu. There is one other, I wanted to go over one issue. I believe my colleagues should have a memo, hope that they do, for me and Councilmember Hucker. And so this particular issue actually came up through some correspondence from the White Oak Science Gateway community, because when we adopted that master plan, I had recommended that we include a position that would help facilitate and coordinate everything that was happening through the master plan, but afterwards, most specifically, that there would be somebody dedicated to help really enforce and realize the vision of the White Oak Science Gateway. And so where we are now is that the community is requesting that we instead have Mr. Jeru Bande be the person that fulfills that role. And although I have extraordinary respect for Mr. Bande and everything that he has done, I said, well, you know, unless he clones himself, I don't even know how he would do such a thing.
I think that's a good idea. He should clone himself. I think that's a good idea.
And we can just take care of
That's the
everything.
first project of the Innovation Fund.
Oh my God! Stop! Stop
have to
it! See,
increase-
it's done. It's done. But long story short, the Fed committee actually took a vote and decided to split basically that position, so it would provide support to the White Flint area as well as the White Oak area. And in my conversation with Councilmember Hucker, it occurs to me that as the regional services centers are obviously being sort of reimagined, that it would be useful to have, you know, 2 or 3 positions that would be literally deputized or assigned to areas of the county where we have these investments or these major projects. So for example, let's say that right now with the White Oak Science Gateway, the Wheaton Revitalization Project, pretty soon we're gonna have, you know, Purple Line issues, White Flint, perhaps in Germantown. while those major hubs of activity, et cetera, are occurring, that, for example, Mr. Bande would have a part-time allocation of one of these liaisons to assist in these processes. That in White Flint, Mr. Hartman would have also, and that way, instead of creating positions specific to, full-time positions specific to the projects, that they would be shared and they would be deputized accordingly. And so that is the spirit of this proposal, is for us to then, right now we have that one particular position, and, we could have that conversation in full council whether Fed would want to, we could incorporate that into this team, and I think we should. But then what we're proposing is, putting on the reconciliation list 2 tranches of $115,000 so that we can at least create 2 more, and that way provide that support to who I believe that the regional services directors really play a pivotal role in being in the ground, in the community, understanding all of the challenges that come up and the opportunities that come up, et cetera. And I've seen it firsthand with Ms. Luisa Montero and with Mr. Bande in terms of how they, play that extraordinary role, but we've all acknowledged that you just don't have enough staff to do that. So that is the proposal that is before you, and it's literally to create this team that can then, once hopefully, Wheaton is done, or Science Gateway is done, or whatever, if there are other projects, then those folks would then provide that support in that way. So that is this particular memo that is before you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President, for bringing this up. And while it wasn't related directly to the Regional Services Center, the same idea was actually discussed with robust conversation, and Mr. Juando and I, along with Mr. Reamer, discussed this question. We actually had a similar approach with, kind of that side of the ledger, so to speak. Currently, the position is split half-time FTE to White Flint, half-time FTE to White Oak. We decided to add to the reconciliation list so that it goes back and returns to a full-time position in each place. And so that would be one way to approach it. This would be another way to approach it. I guess my viewpoint would be I'm happy to add this to the reconciliation list and then sort it out and figure out what is the best way to do it once we have a better, broader budget picture and that conversation takes place. I think separating into 2 tranches makes a lot of sense. And so I just wanted to add a little bit of context that you're on to something here, because, we were talking about, a very similar question of how do we do all the things we want to do in White Flint? How do we do all the things we want to do in White Oak? Just as 2 examples, but 2 critical examples, I think, that have some of the most significant opportunity that have been underutilized so far and that really need robust focus and investment, from our side and from the private side. I think together we need to do both to make that happen. And with all of the public investments that we are making in Wheaton, I share your thoughts there of making sure that we are capitalizing on those significant commitments that we are making with public dollars to make sure that we're getting the end result that we want. So happy to put it on the reconciliation list. I think ultimately we may want to decide which of those approaches during reconciliation is the best way to address this, or do 1 tranche here and 1, that, but very supportive of what you're doing here, and happy to support it, and appreciate you bringing up White Flint as well as part of this.
Thank you, and I figured that maybe we do discuss it in full council. I will say, from my personal observation, I think that one of the reasons why I was moved by this concept of putting it under the regional services directors is because there is a very important component of who is supervising and who is actually driving the work of these liaisons. And I think that the way we were doing it wasn't truly most effective, but seeing firsthand how the regional services directors have to play that role and how they're so connected to the players, all of the stakeholders, I thought, it makes sense for this position to receive guidance, et cetera. And, direction from the regional services directors, versus putting them sort of in this kind of like strange position of who do I get my direction from? So maybe we can just pull these out on full council and then maybe have a conversation about, how would we like to merge those proposals? Councilmember Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much. I'm supportive as well. I think 2 tranches make sense, and I do think we need to have the conversation. But I do believe that the regional service centers are the place that people feel most comfortable going to. And so I think that's something else to keep in mind. But anyhow, I think good discussion, and I certainly support it.
All right, I appreciate that very much. Okay, so what is next in terms of this item?
Approved or whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah, that takes care of everything. The only other item had included the abolishing the M1 position, but I think that we can include that discussion when we take the regional business hub up.
Right, yeah, that's the third item. Okay, great. All right, I think we're done with this item, the outstanding issues. All right, so item 7 is Merit System Protection Board. I think Ms. Arthur is here for that.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fletcher. You sure you don't want to stay?
I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. There you go.
You should
That's
wear a
right.
coat in here.
I know. Bring your gloves.
We're on an everyday basis now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so let's see here. So Ms. Arthur, you prepared this packet for us. This is for the Merit System Protection Board. And I see that you're recommending that the budget for the Merit System Protection Board be approved as submitted, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that is a total recommended budget of $259,443, a 1.5 FTE for 2 part-time positions, right?
Yeah, 2 people who work 3/4 time, right? And you have the chair of the Merit System Protection Board here, as well as the executive director.
Welcome, and thank you so much for everything that you do. Anything you would like to add, Mr. Cater?
Well, obviously, we're very appreciative of everything the council has done to support us. I'm happy to say that, for example, with the council's support, we were able to complete the classification study, which had laid fallow for years. But we got that done on time, at least on time for our schedule and under budget. We also, with the council's support, were able to finally put our decisions up on the website in a searchable format, which is an immense help to the litigants who appear before us. So we are greatly appreciative of those things that we have done with your support. All we're asking for here, of course, is to maintain our 1.5 FTEs, and also an increase in our actually a restoration in our budget to pay for transcripts. So again, we appreciate all the support you've given us. The less you hear from us, the better you know that we're doing our job.
That is true.
And I think that I'd like to take this opportunity, as my last opportunity, really to be before you. So to thank Bruce for really all the tremendous work that he's done as our executive director. He truly has been an outstanding asset for us, and I greatly appreciate everything he's done. So with that said, we would love it if you would approve our budget.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for all your service as well, and all the members, and no doubt, Mr. Martin, as you were explaining to us, of course, the less we hear from you, the better it is, and I like the fact that we haven't heard that much, so that's a good thing. I think without objection, we will approve the $259,443 for your budget. Thank you so much.
Very much.
Okay, for the Ethics Commission, we have.
Robert Cobb.
Yep.
And by the way, this is not Phil Weeda, just in case.
Yeah, Mr. Mia just plays a lot of different roles.
Including new dad.
Oh, congratulations.
This is Natalia's husband.
This is important, gentlemen.
I didn't realize that.
New dad?
Well, he's part of the family. He's Natalia's husband.
Yes, he's part of the family.
Wow.
Well, that's awesome.
You congratulated Natalia a couple
I
weeks
had
ago.
no idea. And I said, oh, well, this is wonderful. That's really, really awesome, and you look like you've been getting a lot of sleep. I don't know how that's possible. There you go. Doesn't it always work out that way? Why?
Is it because you've been at these meetings and getting sleep? I'm just asking, yeah.
I hope she's running up a tab. And the interest rate, I am hoping, in this one particular case is extremely high.
Trust me, I will keep track. Well, congratulations. This is really cool. Yeah. All right, Mr. Cobb, so let's see. Here we have a recommendation from the executive for a budget of $469,955 for the Ethics Commission FY20. Our council staff, Ms. Arthur, recommends approval as submitted. Anything you'd like to add?
No, just that the Ethics Commission appreciates the support, the continued support that it gets from the county council, and that the current budget recommendation addresses the commission's projected needs.
Well, thank you so much for leading this very important function. We do appreciate the work of the commission, and I think without objection, we're happy to support that particular recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and then our final item, item number 9, it is, who's counting? Non-departmental accounts, boards, committees, and commissions, Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, county associations, inauguration and transition, public technology. And what I see here, let's see, there is a recommendation to approve this as recommended by the county executive.
Yes.
Ms. Arthur, anything else you want to add?
No, with the exception of the inauguration and transition, all the NDAs listed here, well, and boards and commissions as well, the rest are dues that the county pays because they're organizations that the county belongs to. And so this comes up yearly, and most of the dues are based on our population. So
Correct.
it goes up accordingly.
That's right. Okay, so yeah, so we have board committees and commissions. The recommended budget is $22,950. For council of government, which is based on our population, is $1,582,391. For county associations is $74,728. 0 for inaugurations. And public technology incorporated $20,000. All right, I think without objection, because I don't see any lights, we will approve this budget. So thank you for being here. And with that, yeah, we don't want any inaugurations this year. We're okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.